All right, everybody. Good evening, and this is like nearing the end of this course, and we have a real pleasure tonight of speaking with Mark-Kostabi. And, you know, I've known of Mark for like, Jesus, over 20 years. And, you know, in this course, we differentiate between vision and strategy. And I would have to say there is not a more brilliant strategist in the art world than Mark-Kostabi. And besides that, Mark's the only person I know in my whole life of a gazillion connections who's met the Pope. And, you know, there's lots of things that I want to talk about with Mark. You know, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie that was made about Mark, and it's pretty wonderful and fascinating and informative, and I don't know, let's see what we can find out. So, Mark, you grew up where? You grew up in Southern California, is that correct?
Yes, Whittier, California.
Oh, same place that Nixon's from.
That's correct. 30 miles east of Los Angeles.
And at what age did you figure out you were going to be an artist?
6.
And so you're sort of like all these other artists who are sort of like, you don't have any choice. You're an artist because you're condemned to be an artist.
Oh, I didn't feel condemned. I felt happy.
Blessed.
And blessed, honored. Basically, I was like the classic class artist. I was the guy who drew a lot, and I drew well, and I got a lot of support and encouragement from my fellow students, teachers, and parents.
Sweet. And did you go to art school?
Yes.
Was it worth it?
Definitely. I loved art school, but I didn't get a degree. I went for 3 years to Cal State Fullerton, and one of the many things I learned in art school was that at that time, it wasn't important to have a degree. My professors told me that, so I said, "Oh, well, then I don't have to graduate. I'm going to New York."
And that's what you did?
Yeah, before getting a degree, because I went to school just for knowledge, not for credentials. Because,
got it. And so you landed in New York at what age? Like 20, 21?
Yeah, I was born in 1960, and I arrived. I started living in New York on January 1 of 1982. I think I was 21.
Okay, cool. And so talk to me. What was the first 2 years in New York? How did you get yourself positioned in the art world? How did you begin relationships? How did you make contacts? How did your experiences grow?
Okay, well, I already had some positioning while I was an art student at Fullerton, Cal State Fullerton. Because I was already showing my drawings at a gallery on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles, the Molly Barnes Gallery.
Oh, Molly's a great artist. Molly was and is, was a great dealer and is a great human being with a great eye and great connections and a sweetheart, don't you think?
Yeah, I didn't realize that you knew her.
And, come on. I know you and I know everybody else. I was on a panel one time with Molly, and I've been familiar with her. She's been a large personality. Molly Barnes, folks, Southern California dealer. She's been, significant for a long time.
She gave John Baldessari his first gallery show and also discovered some of the photorealists and was very close with de Kooning, who she's writing a book about right now.
She's not, is she a private dealer now, or she's no longer a public dealer, is she?
Well, she's a private dealer. Every once in a while she reopens a gallery. But mainly she hosts panel discussions and lectures featuring luminaries from the art world on both coasts. But the thing is, while I was a student in Los Angeles, I was encouraged by my teachers and fellow students that my work was already good enough for galleries. So I took them at face value, and one day got in my parents' car and drove out to Hollywood, and the first gallery I was attracted to was Molly's gallery, and I walked in with my drawings, and this happens 1 in a million times, maybe 1 in 10 million times, but I was actually accepted into the gallery, walking in off the street cold with my drawings. It just basically never happens, but it happened to me. But
and you didn't know you were supposed to be blown away by that experience, did you? You just thought that was normal operating procedure at the time.
Right. I didn't know that most artists get rejected hundreds of times after they walk in through the front door of a gallery to try to get into the gallery. I didn't realize that. But I started working there with Molly, and she started selling my drawings immediately at very low prices, but to very high-profile personalities like the director Billy Wilder, Norman Lear, Dan Melnick, Ray Stark, Doug Kramer, many of the top Hollywood people. And I didn't realize what an honor that was either, because I was about 19 at the time and still a student. And then I also didn't realize why my teachers were jealous of me, because they didn't have galleries, and here one of their students was already showing it at an important gallery in Los Angeles. However, she was only selling my drawings first for like $10 a piece, and then they went up to about 100, and then 150, and she wasn't selling one a day. At first she did, but then after a while, you know, it took a month or two before she'd sell another drawing. So it wasn't enough to move out of my parents' house, and it certainly wasn't, I didn't feel like a rich and famous artist. Even though I was eating at the best restaurant in Hollywood, Molly hooked me up to have me design a menu for Ma Maison, where Wolfgang Puck started out. And I was kind of hobnobbing with the rich and influential in Hollywood, but I was just a kid and naive, and I didn't know how to parlay it into a bigger thing.
When did MoCA open in L.A., the Museum of Contemporary Art? Was it about that time or a little bit later?
A little bit later, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. I think that was really a seminal thing, though. I think that really, you know, got a lot more of Hollywood involved in the art scene in a much more aggressive way. Because I'm trying to figure out why you didn't stay in Los Angeles and what propelled you to want to go to New York. I suspect it's because L.A. wasn't happening quite then yet.
That's part of it. Plus, everyone I talked to said that New York was the place for art. And so it's just like an aspiring actress who wants to become a movie star. They moved to Hollywood. And back then, you moved to New York. And still now, it's still my rule number 2 of how to become a rich and famous artist.
Wait, you have rules?
I have 6 rules.
All right, wait, let's not go there yet. When you landed in New York, did you have a place to live? Were you living in a hotel? Were you at the Leo House? Did you have a friend lined up? What was the deal?
None of the above. I went there with nothing but enthusiasm and confidence and my drawings. And I went to the McBurney YMCA on 23rd Street. And I spent, I had $100, and it was $14 a night to sleep in a bedroom the size of a closet. And the $100 got spent pretty fast. And then I had to figure out an alternative. And then at that point, I did rely on a friend of a friend who, it was a chance encounter. I found an apartment that was $400 a month, and I took a chance and sublet that apartment. And I started selling my drawings in New York, too. Basically, practically on the street. I mean, I literally would try to sell my drawings to people I was sitting next to in the subway by starting up a conversation.
So, as a young man, you had a lot of moxie. Did you have the moxie when you were younger? Did you have this kind of moxie when you were in, like, grade school or junior high school or high school?
As far as my art was concerned, yes. Moxie means confidence, right?
Yeah, or chutzpah, or balls, or, huevos.
Never had a shortage of chutzpah when it came to my art career. In other aspects of life, I was much more timid or insecure. For example, to this day, I still really don't know how to swim. And throw me in water, and I'll act like a little kid who's scared. And there are other things that I'm not very, I'm below average at. But in art, I always knew that I was above average. And I was always considered the best artist in school. And I got so much encouragement, so the moxie came easily. And then I had all these kind of symbolic things that happened to me that made it seem easy, even though it really wasn't. Like, for example, the way I got into the Molly Barnes Gallery, just walking in. Then in my first day in New York, I had an aspiration to also be an illustrator. So I called up one of the editors at the New York Times, and I said, I make these line drawings that are charming and psychologically compelling. Can I have an appointment with you? I want to be an illustrator for the op-ed page. And the editor actually responded to me by saying, you know, you called at the right time because I urgently need a drawing. Can you be at my office in an hour? So I rushed over there, and I got the job. And 2 days later, I was in the subway, and I saw people reading copies of the New York Times, and I saw my drawing in there. So like day 2 or 3 in New York, I was already published in the New York Times, which to this day is still one of the world's most prestigious newspapers. So that was another fluke thing. But obviously, that didn't lead to my success, because getting in the New York Times once is impressive, but if you're in there like 10 times, then you know you're in business. Same with
How many times did you do illustrations for the New York Times? Was that a job? Was it a one-shot deal, or what?
At first, it was a one-shot deal. Many years later, because I tried again, and it wasn't so easy the second time or the third time. Many years later, I ended up seeing my paintings used as illustrations in the New York Times again. But this time, they weren't done by assignment. They were, I gave the editor photographs of my paintings.
Got it. All right. So let's go back to the New York Times and the get-go in 1981 or so. And
so these
all right. So what you talked about the keys to your success. How did you go from there? That gave you enough money to go have lunch. How did you go from that to, beginning to be successful?
Okay. After these 2 events, the gallery in LA and the New York Times, everything after that was rejection. I was rejected by over 50 galleries. They said, oh, your work looks too much like Keith Haring. We already have one Keith Haring in the art world, so sorry. And then I went to more magazines and newspapers, and they said, well, your drawings are charming, but they lack volume. They're just simple line drawings, and we need volume in the illustrations. So after about a year, I realized, and art dealers like Ivan Karp, who worked with Leo Castelli, he said, well, your drawings are charming and eccentric and interesting, but even if we sold out a show of your drawings, we couldn't pay the overhead of the gallery. Where are the paintings? So this got in my head, I have to make paintings.
So at that point, you weren't making paintings, or not very many at all.
Just making drawings, but I knew how to paint because I'd been painting since I was 12.
Okay.
And then I said, okay, I better make some paintings because that's what they're asking for. So I started making paintings, and then the gallery showed a little more interest, but they said things like, now your work, it's better, but now it looks too much like Jed Garrett, who was a big art star at the moment, along with Julian Schnabel and David Sally. And the magazine said, well, this is looking better. Maybe we can give you a job or two. And I got like a half of a job or two as an illustrator. And then I remembered a cartoon, a comic book, a comic strip I read in Art Forum, which was a cynical parody of how to be successful in the art world. And it was a comic strip about a guy who has to completely change his life to make it. He has to live art, breathe art, think art, has to drop all of his friends unless they're important people in the art world, has to only go to art world events, and especially a lot of art openings. And so, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So I called up the Leo Castelli Gallery and said, when's your next opening? And in a matter of days, I was there. And I saw people all over the place socializing, which I hadn't seen before. I didn't know that that really went on. And then it all clicked. And I started meeting people left and right, artists, curators, collectors, mainly artists at first, because they're easy to meet and they're omnipresent at the art openings. And these artists were friendly, and they introduced me to other artists. And after meeting 5 people in one day, the next day I met like another 25 people, because each person introduced me to another 5 friends. And in a matter of a week or two, I was part of the art scene. And an artist said, oh, yeah, I want to see your work. Can I see your work? And then he said, you know, your work would fit into this group show that my dealer friend is curating. And I got in a group show. And days after that, I got in another group show. And then suddenly, dealers were seeing that I was popping up in these group shows. So they started offering me one-person shows. And it was just, then it happened practically overnight. As soon as I started to socialize in the art world. And it does sound superficial, but it's absolutely necessary to network, socialize, go to tons of art openings, parties at artist lofts after the openings. And I don't mean to sound as superficial as to say that's all it takes, because within the art world, there are tons of people who go to all the art openings and all the art parties, and they can never get a show. because you also have to be able to deliver the goods.
Yeah, but I agree. But I think it's almost a prerequisite, and this is what I share in this course, to get your ass out there into the art world and become engaged. And otherwise, you're pretty much a secret. And then if you sit in your ivory tower waiting for the art world to come to you, you're going to get cobwebs.
Ivory tower sounds a little bit more glamorous than what reality is. Usually, people are sitting in their suburban living rooms, dreaming of having some recognition. But it just doesn't work that way. 99% of every successful artist in the world is socially active in the art world, and throughout history too. Certainly Caravaggio hung out with the powers that were in his day. Even Van Gogh knew all of the famous artists in Paris. He didn't get very far while he was alive, but he was certainly part of the scene.
That's totally true. It sort of makes you wonder about all the other artists who might have been their equals who weren't socially engaged in what the hell their art looked like. History is controlled by the people who participated.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so let's talk about these 6 rules of Mark-Kostabi's. I'm really curious.
I'll run down the list. Number 1, make great art. Rule number 2.
Wait a minute, I'm writing this down. I think for me, make great art's rule number 3. Okay.
To me, in the end, I'm an idealist and an optimist, and I do think that's the most important thing. Make great art. Number 2, live in New York.
That's not on my list. Okay, go ahead.
That's the second most important thing. Number 3, circulate.
That's number 1 for me. Okay, it's cool.
In our internet age, maybe those priorities are shifting a little bit. I still think that
you can still socialize. You can still circulate via the internet, but you still have to get your ass out there.
Okay, and then number 4 is be professional.
Yep.
Number 5, have a story.
That's a good point.
I haven't left out a number so far, right?
No. But we've got one left. Do you remember what it is? Number 6?
Number 6 is get other people to work for you.
Yeah, that's one of my mottos. Nothing's impossible for the person who has somebody else to do it for them.
Now, my rules obviously can be elaborated on. Like, for example, number 6, I'm known as the artist who doesn't paint his own paintings. Obviously, that's not entirely what's going on over here at Kostabi World. Well, it's true that I have a number of painters over on that part of the studio who paint for me. I do a lot of the work myself, and arguably, one could even say I do more artwork than your average artist by myself. Plus, I have all these assistants. But when I say get other people to work for you, I mean also not necessarily to produce your artwork, but to promote you, to talk about you, to get your friends enthusiastic, and to get them to invite their friends to your events. And enthusiasm is contagious. And if you're enthusiastic about what you do, and if you circulate, and your friends and art world connections see your enthusiasm, they'll pick up on it and share it with others. And in that way, they're working for you. But also, it is good to get them to literally work for you, like as employees, or art dealers who really are the artist's employees. Many people in the art world think of, there are expressions used like, oh, he's giving me a show, referring to a dealer, or did so-and-so give you a show? I don't believe that's the way, I don't think that's healthy. I think it's the artist who gives the gallery the show.
Thank you, I agree.
And the dealer, the art gallery is a store, and the artist is a supplier. So it's not healthy to let the store owner behave like a paternal figure to the artist. And in the art world, people use expressions like, oh, this dealer nourished another artist. That's wrong. Like Walmart doesn't nourish Armani Exchange or whatever they're selling in there. It's the other way around. The artist is the boss. And you have to have, and another mistake that artists frequently make is they think, If only, okay, see you later, Paul. They think, if only I can get a gallery to represent my work, then all my problems would be solved. Now, the mistake is the singularity. They shouldn't be saying, if only I can get a gallery. They should be thinking, if only I can get 10 galleries. Because one is not enough. If you have one, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and you're potentially setting yourself up to letting the dealer act like a paternal figure or like a parental figure, which is really bad. It makes the artist small and the dealer in control. And some of these dealers have huge egos, and they like to say they have a stable of artists. I represent 12 artists, and they're all mine exclusively. And I have said since the 80s to this day that a dealer should not have a stable of artists. An artist should have a stable of dealers.
Precisely. So, I don't know where to go with this. Can I keep going? I don't need to interrupt. You got more to say?
Yeah, I can keep going. I can do this for hours. I've got the information. I've expanded on rule number 6, which is get other people to work for you, which means your dealers, your friends, as well as perhaps your painting assistants eventually. Rule number 1, make great art. I could add to that, which would be make great art that other people really want to own. It helps if people really want your stuff and are willing to pay money for it. And that's the case with artists like Lichtenstein, who was the bread and butter of the Leo Castelli Gallery in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Leo showed other historically important artists like Salvatore Scarpita and conceptualists, but he wasn't paying the rent with those people. I mean, critics were happy with that work, but Lichtenstein made the stuff that people really wanted to have. And therefore, Lichtenstein was very rich, and Leo had the money to pay for his other interesting but not as desirable artists. So it's got to be great, plus people really want to have the stuff for real. And one way you can make sure that's happening is you can take surveys. I highly recommend take your 10 of your paintings, different ones, where you can see a variety, and put them on Facebook or send out an email blast asking a lot of your friends to number the paintings and say, please choose your favorite 3 out of these 10 paintings. And you'll be amazed at how 1 or 2 of the paintings are going to come in first place very often. Not always. Sometimes it can be a tie, but I have found that there's a clear winner, and that's the painting people want. And that's what you should consider, because art, for me at least, is a dialogue, and for most artists, there's an element of dialogue. And getting that feedback will tell you what you can sell easier. And that doesn't mean that the painting that came in last place is the worst painting. It's just not wise to try to be pushing that on all your friends. Save that for later when you can afford to, but be realistic and find out what you do that people really like and push that. So this is all part of rule number 1. Make great art that people really want. You're adjusting your lighting. I think I could do that too, but my assistants have all gone for the night. So
yeah, my monitor went off, and part of my lighting is the monitor looking at me, or you know what I mean. So because I hadn't touched the mouse in a while, because I'm looking at you.
Okay.
The monitor went to sleep, so then I hit it again.
Oh, sorry. Elaboration on rule number 2. You have to live in New York. If you're not willing to live in New York, you have to visit New York during the high season of the art world. You can succeed in the art world. You can become a rich and famous artist by only doing 5 out of the 6 rules, or maybe even if you only do 4. But if you're really swimming upstream, if you try to do only 3, you'll have a much easier time if you spend a lot of time in New York. If you can only spend 4 months of the year in New York, they should be October, November, and April and May, when the weather is great and when the art world is at fever pitch in activity. For example, if you spend 30 days in New York in the month of October, that's worth way more than if you spent all of June, July, and August here. Even if you spent 1 week in high season, is worth more than spending a whole month or 3 months when nothing's going on. So you don't need to be in New York in June, July, and August, especially August when everybody in the art world pretty much leaves. It's dead. So, and then if you live near New York already and you don't want to like live here, at least come in Thursday nights for the openings in Chelsea. From 6 to 8 every Thursday night, you should be walking around Chelsea. If you want to do it the easy way, if you want to do it the hard way, don't do that. You can succeed the hard way, but why do that? Why punish yourself? For example, I tell my artist friends in Italy all the time, some of them are kind of famous in Italy, but not all over the world. And they're really good professional artists, and they do make a living at their art. But they deserve to be rich and famous and known all over the world. And instead of coming to New York and having 1 show here, they do 10 shows in Italy, whereas the 1 show in New York would be worth more than 10 shows in Italy. Whatever you do in the art world in New York automatically has somewhere between 10 to 100 times more value than if you did the exact same thing in any other place in the world. With the possible exception of London, but I'm not an expert on that. Obviously, Damien Hirst became an international superstar without living in New York. He stayed in London, so that's doable as well. But other major artists like Maurizio Cattelan, who's one of the world's most famous artists, just had a retrospective at the Guggenheim. He's Italian. If he didn't move to New York, as he did some 10 or 20 years ago, he would remain a provincial, successful Italian artist in Italy that no one here would have heard of. But he switched. So I don't know if some people are upset hearing this, but just about everyone I know in the art world that's actually a participant would agree with this. That New York is still unquestionably the art world capital of contemporary art.
How much time are you spending in New York, Mark?
I spend 4 months of the year here.
You spend the 4 months you just described, you know, like October, November, April, May?
I'm here every October, November, April, and May. And I learned this from 15 solid years of experience living here 12 months of the year, 24/7. And when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, that was easy to do. Because when you're in your 20s, it doesn't really matter if it's 10 below zero and the wind chill factor makes it 20 below zero in January in New York, because your enthusiasm gets you through that. But you know, after I became 35 years old, I'd done it for 15 years. I said, why do I continue to punish myself? Being in New York in January when it's freezing, plus everybody's in St. Bart's, I'm just wasting my time here. I've got to think about being in a warmer place in January and February, and also in August. And so I chose Italy for those more punishing months. And then
How did that happen? How did you pick Italy?
Well, actually, to be more precise, Italy picked me because in the early 90s, I started being invited to have a lot of shows in Italy, and I sold a lot of art there, so I felt very embraced. Now, I didn't reach out to Italy like I had to reach out, and like every artist has to reach out at the beginning in New York to become part of the scene. Once you're a success in New York, other countries come to you automatically. First, Japan. In the 80s, Japan embraced anything that was hot and trendy in New York. So I got shows in Japan automatically without me ever having to call anyone in Japan. They called me. And that lasted for about 10 years. And then Italy did the same thing. And to this day, I have a lot of success in Italy. And it's been amplified because I live there now to so I can enhance the relationships and police them, actually.
At this point, your Italian's pretty good, right?
Parlo italiano abbastanza bene.
How did you learn Italian?
I took lessons, private lessons in New York. I took a learning annex course in New York, and then when I moved there, I took a class. And then since then, it's been daily life and asking cab drivers and friends for tips. But
are you selling more art in Italy than you are in the United States, or what's the ratio been over the years?
Now, yes. Now it's my strongest market by far. But at first it was New York, then the rest of the United States, and then Japan, and then a few other countries in Europe, and then Italy took over dramatically for me. I still sell a lot in the United States. I just sold a whole bunch of paintings to the Martin Lawrence galleries. They're a chain of 12 throughout the country, so my work gets distributed through them. And I also show at other New York galleries like the Adam Baumfold Gallery. So I have a market in the U.S. also. I still sell a lot of art here. And I've sold thousands of paintings in the United States. But
historically, I get the sense that you sell more paintings than you consign paintings to galleries. Is that you sell them to the galleries in multiples? Is that correct?
Consignment is a terrible thing. It's an unfortunate reality in the American art world and also in New York. Artists, almost all of us in New York, have to consign our work to galleries, which means literally we're loaning the works to galleries, hoping that we'll get paid for them or to get the work back after it's not sold. Many galleries won't tell you when they sell the work, and they'll only pay you after a few years when they say, oh, I really would like to get that painting back. And then they'll say, oh, I'm just about to sell it. Can I have it?
Of course.
Meanwhile, they've sold it like 2 years ago, and they need another month or two to actually pay you. Some galleries behave decently and don't do that, but that's not the rule. That's the exception, I've learned. So that is an unfortunate part of dealing with the American art world, that they want the art on consignment. And that's just the way the game is played here. In Europe, dealers and gallery owners are more accustomed to buying the work up front from the artist and paying. They get a bigger discount, but at least the artist gets a nice big check, and the artist doesn't have to worry about keeping tabs on the consignment contract.
What other differences can you address between the European and Italian market and the American model?
Well, that's a vast, complex question, because there are different echelons in the art world. There's the world where people spend multi-millions of dollars on a single piece, where the participants are Maurizio Catalan, Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, Richard Prince, and those artworks get bought and sold in Europe and the United States. I'm not an expert in that world. I only know what I read in the magazines. I am an expert in selling artworks in the $3,000 to $25,000 price range, or maybe I personally sell most of my works like for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, and occasionally $50,000 per piece. That area I can speak with authority, and in Europe and for sure in Italy, they love Americans, and they love things that arrive with American, especially New York credentials, and they look at the auction catalogs from Sotheby's and Christie's in the United States as a guide, and if they see that something is selling in the auction catalogs here, it makes it easier for them to sell it in Italy or in Europe, because they can say, look, this is selling at Sotheby's and Christie's. That means the artist is international, it's liquid, this is no joke, you're not wasting your money, here's the proof. And so the brand name aspect makes things really easy to sell in Europe.
Well, let's open this.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let's open this up to questions in a moment, but I'm curious about how you've stayed successful when other artists, let's say Jed Garrett, who I think, disappeared, and Sandro Chia pretty much disappeared. Why do some artists disappear?
All right. You just named two people who I both personally know, and I have a lot of insight into those two cases, and they're not the same story. Sandro Chia has not disappeared. He's very successful. He's very wealthy, but he doesn't have as many New York shows as he used to. But he has plenty of shows in Italy, including in major museums, and he's in top collections all over the world. He's an absolute success story to this day. It's true that he's less a part of the international critical discourse.
Okay.
But if he were to have a show in New York, it would not surprise critics. They might say, oh, Sandro Chia hasn't had a show in New York in the past 3 years, but here he is, and it's not bad. He also has 2 vineyards, and he's become very successful as a wine producer, selling his wine in top restaurants throughout the world. Castello Romitorio. He has some other businesses, too. He's by no means gone. Jed Garrett, that's a bit more tragic. He's a great guy. I'm Facebook friends with him. He was more famous than Sandro Chia in the 80s. When I got to New York, he was absolutely in the top 10 of the most important artists. Everybody was talking about Jed Garrett, along with Julian Schnabel, David Salle, Robert Longo, and then there were these 2 young newcomers, Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. But before them, Jed Garrett was the big star.
True.
I don't know exactly what happened to Jed, but for sure the fact that he left New York didn't help him. And he's now going to move back. He also changed his style. He had a very unmistakable signature style. It was so signature that I was rejected by galleries because people thought my work looked too much like his. He painted faceless figures with strong chiaroscuro and sfumato, which could be a description of my work as well. But he stopped doing that, and he started doing abstractions, which were beautiful, tasteful, and interesting. But
I remember that. You're right.
Yeah, he believed in it. He changed his style. They didn't look like quote unquote Jed Garrett's anymore. Plus, he left New York. There were some other personal things that happened. I don't know the details of that. But he kind of did disappear. Hopefully he's going to come back because he's a super nice guy. And his new work is fantastic. You can see he's on Facebook. You can look him up, Jed Garrett.
I'll do it. All right. You over the years, over the last, what, 8 years, you want to say something, Mark? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point. Longevity. Because
yes.
It's hard enough to get your first show. But it's a lot easier to get your first show than it is to get your 16th show. That's the true test of a successful artist, the longevity. Okay, when you're fresh out of art school and you're the new flavor of the month, you're going to get your show if you do all the 6 rules, and you're going to be a success. And your show might very well sell out. And then you're going to get your second show 12 months later. And what usually happens is there's already a new flavor of the month around the corner, and you're going to sell okay on your second show too, but you may not sell out the whole show. You might sell 15 paintings instead of 20, because the new flavor of the month is already getting a lot of attention, who's selling all 20 paintings at the first show. Then your third show is going to be a lot tougher. You might sell 5 paintings, and you might start feeling like, hey, what happened to me? How come Emily's getting all the attention now? And that's when the alcoholism kicks in, and the partying and the delusions of grandeur and, oh, I'm so much better than these new superficial artists who have no soul. Let's go get drunk, and all these dealers are jerks, and or maybe, and then your fourth show you don't sell anything, and then you move to Philadelphia, and then it's over, and that happens a lot. Or you might say, oh well, maybe I should just teach.
Ooh. Okay.
So the real test is getting that 16th and 17th show. And the way to do that is to realize that these dealers are not your parents. They're store owners. And you can't just have one store selling your stuff. 10 isn't even enough. 20 or 30, now I'm going to start being impressed. If you have like 2 or 3 dealers in New York, maybe one for the paintings, another for the prints, and then another one for the sculptures, then you need a dealer in Los Angeles, one in Chicago, Boston, Florida, and then you have to have all your European dealers. Then you're starting to talk career. When you have your studio with your files, your secretary, if you're a true believer who thinks that you have to do every brush stroke yourself, then that's fine. But at least have someone stretch the canvas and clean the brushes, because you need time to go to the art parties and have a great time with critics, curators, collectors, and the art scene.
I agree. So, Mark, over the years, you've written a really good column periodically in Artnet that has some of the most insightful advice I've ever seen. You know, I think it's really, really dead on. So there's some people who've got their hands up who have questions. Let's let some folks ask questions. Sharon, go ahead.
Thanks for talking with us. I've been going to Emilia-Romagna now for probably every year for about 6 years. You know,
wait, can I interrupt? I'm sorry, Sharon. How can I see you? Oh, there you are. Okay. Hi, Sharon.
The software follows the voice, Mark, so there's sometimes a few seconds lag.
All the little buttons at the bottom, if I click on those, can I see more people?
If you click on the postage stamp in the upper right-hand corner that makes me big and ugly, you can see more people underneath me.
I have done that already. You're not big and ugly anymore.
Well, thank you.
Sorry. No. You look great. But the little buttons at the bottom, can I click on those?
Yeah, I think you can click on anything, but I hope it doesn't blow this up, man. You're doing a good job. I want to keep rolling.
I'll follow the voice. Okay, let's go for it. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So I go to Italy every year, to Emilia-Romagna, and I'm in Bologna often. And I must say, I've never been there for Arte Fiera, but I don't sense that there's anything really going on in the arts in Italy. Well, normally I'm in Parma and sometimes Bologna. Are there things going on there all year long, or in October in Italy? Like in galleries, maybe?
Yeah. No, Italy is a major art country. Historically, for sure, and today, very much so. It's a big market. Right before the crash of 2008, I would talk to dealers about who's buying at the big auctions at Sotheby's and Christie's in New York, and a huge percentage of them were people with Italian passports. There's tremendous enthusiasm among collectors in Italy. For example, in Italy, every small town has at least a few serious contemporary art collectors. Not just the major cities, but every small town. You can't even say that. You can't say that about the United States. Every small town, there are tons of homes that have original paintings on the walls. In America, the small towns have, at best, posters or maybe some prints. But the idea of owning fine art in the small towns in America is not as common as it is in Italy. Every cab driver in Rome, you can have a conversation about Caravaggio or Leonardo da Vinci, or even American people like Jackson Pollock or Andy Warhol. They can talk to you about artists. In New York, that doesn't happen. What? Both contemporary and antique art. Italy is a big art country. The idea that nothing's going on there in the arts is completely false. Arte Fiera is only one of many, many art fairs. There's a major art fair every month in Italy. Every single month there's an art fair, and then there are a bunch of minor art fairs in addition to that. There's way more than 12 art fairs a year in Italy.
So then there's good and interesting galleries in both Parma and Bologna all year long.
Well, I can't speak about Parma. Bologna for sure. There are contemporary art galleries that are considered important, also internationally. The majority of them are in Milan and Turin. And now Rome is threatening to be the new art capital because Larry Gagosian opened a gallery there, and there are two major contemporary art museums in Rome. One's called Maxi, one's called Macro. Not one, but two. Milan doesn't even have one museum dedicated to contemporary art, but Rome has two huge ones that are architectural wonders also, especially Maxi, designed by Zaha Hadid. So there's plenty going on in Italy. But that said, my rule number 2 was live in New York. I mean, I say go to Italy after you become famous, to maintain, to live the good life and get extra glory, fame, and money and all that. But to start out there to become famous is really swimming upstream. You should go where the support is. Go where the action is. The action is in New York.
Thanks.
All right, Sharon, thank you. Jeff, take it away.
Mark, all these galleries you're talking about, I'm assuming you have pieces in each one, or are they selling by pictures? How many pieces of work do you have out there?
Currently, I make about 5,000 paintings a year, and most of them are sold fairly shortly after I make them. There have been some years where I've made 1,000 paintings a year. I mostly sell the work directly to dealers in quantities. I've had numerous sales which were 100 paintings at a time to one dealer, or even 130 paintings. Once someone bought 135 paintings in one shot and paid all at once. As I said earlier, obviously the dealers get a generous discount. Instead of the 50-50 consignment deal that most artists in America do, I end up selling these paintings at a 75% discount to the dealer. So if the painting costs $10,000 to the public, the dealer pays $2,500 because they're buying 100 paintings, sometimes even more. Sometimes I sell them at 20% of the retail value. But I'm happy to do that because they get a great deal, so they have more motivation to push because they're going to make a bigger profit. And they can then take the risk themselves of consigning the work to other dealers at a 50-50 split. So they might buy them from me for 20% of the retail price. Then they consign them to dealers at 50-50, and they make 30% theoretically without doing any work. They just have to hope that they can collect the money once the work is sold.
That's amazing.
That's how it works. So I'm at the point where
Mark does pretty well.
I can sell to dealers because I now am a brand name, and I have a proven market, so dealers don't feel like they're taking a risk when they're buying my work. Plus, I give to certain dealers, if I have to, I'll give an added incentive. If they're worried about the risk of being stuck with some unsaleable works, I say, look, buy these paintings, pay me in full now, and after 6 months, if you're stuck with a few that you can't sell for whatever reason, maybe the subject matter is too depressing, or maybe it has too much orange in it or too much purple, then I'll take it back in trade, and I'll even give you 2 small ones for 1 big one, because small ones are easier to sell. Or I might even say I'll give you 4 miniature paintings for 1 big one, because the miniatures are super easy to sell. Actually, I just accidentally mentioned orange and purple and the depressing subject matter. I should probably go over a list of the surefire ways to create unsaleable art.
Go for it.
Well, paint rats really big with lots of bright green.
Paint what?
Rats.
Rats.
Rodents. Bloody ones. Bloody rats with lots of green, and paint them really big.
I don't even want to write this down.
And some artists do stuff like that. And you could probably sell that, too. You could probably sell it as with the quintessential bad boy mentality of breaking all the rules. But you would be the exception, not the rule.
Banksy's done okay with rats.
You're right. There you go. But I don't know if that's not all he does. But rats are an unappealing subject. You know, even like take an artist who's wildly successful commercially, Andy Warhol. Within Warhol's body of work, certain pieces are much easier to sell and sell for much higher prices than other ones. And it's usually the appealing subject matter, like Elvis or Marilyn Monroe, and also when it's done with color, in a colorful way, with pleasing colors like gold and red and blue. Those are colors that, of course, this sounds superficial, but it's just the truth of the art market. Red sells. Blue and red together sells. Red, blue with gold together is probably the most commercial color combination you can come up with. That would be red, blue, plus gold.
If it's not a landscape, green's pretty difficult.
Obviously, Van Gogh did well with green, or his dealers now do well with his green paintings. Green can work if it's used logically. Like if you paint a golf course or a landscape.
Hey, Mark, we got a bunch of people with hands up, so let's move along, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, one of them Elasa took her hand down. Let's go then to, wait a minute, I saw Sandra, your turn, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I'm curious about rule number 5, have a story.
Oh, yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
Very, very important. One way or another, you have to give the writers material. Otherwise, you'll be boring, and they won't write about you. Now, there are many ways you can do that. If you are boring, somehow you have to turn that into your image. Like the artist who makes the most exciting paintings in the world, but he or she has the most mundane, uneventful lifestyle. If you foreground that, that could be your story. It's much easier, though, if you get in fights with celebrities or create scandals about telling the world that you don't paint your own paintings, nor even think up the ideas. Like that was one of my stories, for example. But writers for magazines, newspapers, blogs, the ones that get paid to write, they would prefer to get paid without having to do too much work. It's human nature to want to get free stuff, to do things the easy way, to have someone else do your work for you, and you get all the fame and the glory. So if you do the writer's job for them, they're going to love you for it, because and they're going to write about you, or they'll just basically rehash what you've written and put their name on it, and it's going to help promote you, and it's going to help get them another small paycheck for being an underpaid writer, which most writers are, especially art writers. Some of them get paid $50 a review. I think there are some that get paid even less than that, and maybe some of them write for free just to get their name in certain magazines.
I think you're right about that. I think that Anton Kiefer was an artist who was particularly easy to write about, writing about German angst, etc.
Yeah. And look at all the other famous artists that we talk about constantly. Jean-Michel Basquiat, he had a great story, many stories. You could write novels about his life, because here it was a young black guy who conquered the white art world, hung out with celebrities. Madonna was his girlfriend, hung out with Andy Warhol, died of a drug overdose. The list went on and on. He had a story. And then, obviously, Jeff Koons has numerous stories. He was a stockbroker that became an artist and sold memberships to the Museum of Modern Art, and as a Museum of Modern Art employee, and charmed everybody, and then of course one of his stories was similar to one of my stories, which is foregrounding the fact that he had a legion of employees who fabricated his work. Damien Hirst has numerous stories, you know, the shark, the whole London art scene, the fights, the scandals with Saatchi, and there's just material for not only critics to write about, but journalists and tabloid gossip columnists. I was, and probably still am, addicted to publicity, but I certainly was addicted to seeing my name in page 6 of the New York Post in the 80s and 90s, and I became quite good at getting my name published in page 6, which was and still is one of the most read gossip columns in the world. I knew exactly how to frame my story, to write my story, how to get it to the journalist. At first, pre-internet, I would call the Richard Johnson, who was the editor at the time, and give him my story, and wake up at 6:30 in the morning the next morning, go have breakfast, open up the New York Post and see my item. And that helped my art career because I appeared in the gossip columns almost every day. Later, when the email happened, I learned how to type up my story, and I emailed it to editors of magazines. And then I would see it often printed the next morning verbatim. Maybe they'll change one word. And that clicked. So
that's all really true. Mark, let's take another question, okay? Let's go to Alasa. Go ahead, Alasa.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for sharing with us. I wanted to know how you developed your faceless imagery through the years.
It was one of the many things I was doing as an experiment as a student at Cal State Fullerton in 1979 and 1980. I was just trying everything because I loved art, and I loved conceptual art, performance art, installations, sculpture, paintings. And one of the many things I did was these thousands of calligraphic marks on long pieces of paper, receipt tape that went on for hundreds of feet. And then I filled up notebooks with calligraphic marks, and I would show these calligraphic pencil drawings and ink drawings to my fellow students and teachers, and they were supportive and enthusiastic about the energy with them, and they started to particularly point out the ones that resembled figures, and then those figures gradually morphed into stick figures, and then little by little it became a kind of a coat hanger line drawing of a faceless figure. I actually thought of it as a stick figure with a more rounded head instead of a faceless figure. I was actually adding, not subtracting. And I could see that they were getting more, that was more of a language. So I did more of that. I liked the attention I got for these drawings. And little by little, they started having psychological content. And it was, for me, a dialogue with people that I knew. I didn't realize at the time, but it was also a marketing survey because I was intuitively figuring out what people liked. And I didn't mind doing what people liked because I liked the love and attention for it, which later became money. And then,
cool. Hey, Mark, I think we've got time for 3 more questions if we don't go on too long, okay?
Okay.
Cool. Patrick, it's your turn. Go ahead.
How you doing, Mark?
Great, thanks.
2 questions. What do you think about Thomas Kinkade as an artist and also as a art business person?
Well, he also has done many thousands of paintings. I haven't seen them all, so I would be it would be improper for me to give an all-consuming opinion about him, which most people do. In fact, I don't like it when people sum up my entire body of work and then find out they've only seen 100 of my paintings when I've done 19,000. 100 is a small percentage of 19,000, so it's not fair to judge an artist based on a fraction of their production. So of the paintings that I have seen of Thomas Kinkade, I really like some of them. The ones that I consider his best are kind of special and magical and actually original. Some critics like to say he's not original, but I think there's something really good and original about it. They're actually painted well, and there's a magical presence, and there's a kitsch element. But you know, I don't look at kitsch scornfully. We live in a post-Enrico By, post-Asger Jorn, post-Julie Wachtel, Jeff Koons world, where kitsch is an acceptable color on the palette of the contemporary art discourse. And I think Thomas Kincaid's work holds its own next to artists who are celebrated in this quote-unquote serious art world, like Lisa Yaskavich. And then the second part of your question was, as an art business, I don't know all the details, but from what I've heard, he was quite good at it. It was kind of insanely bizarre and kind of original to have all these subcategories of his assistants, like the expert embellishers or whatever they were called. So, you know, I never met the guy, but it was interesting what he did.
Come on. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you too, Patrick. Sam, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. I read all the posts in Artnet that Paul sent to all of us, and I was really struck by one. There were many, but there was one in particular. When you were walking through Soho, you were 24 years old, and you had already achieved an incredible amount of success. And I was wondering what was it in your background or from your family that enabled you to access that kind of awareness at such a young age?
Definitely, I had a lot of encouragement from my parents, who were both born in Estonia. And I sometimes theorize, I never asked them this, but I theorize that they moved to America to pursue the American dream. But since they didn't speak English very well, they didn't achieve it. Well, they did, because they lived comfortable upper middle class lifestyles, but they didn't become millionaires. But through their children, they realized the American dream, partially by being very encouraging and supportive. So I got a lot of confidence from my parents. That helped a lot. And then walking through the streets of Soho carrying paintings is an extension of the importance of visibility. To succeed in art, you got to be visible. We sell images, and not just the images in our paintings or in our video installations or whatever it is, but we also sell our own image as an artist persona. And one of my images that I wanted to sell was ubiquitousness and also business savvy. I wasn't opposed to the idea of merging business with art. We learned in art school, when Andy Warhol said business art is the best art, that was a very acceptable avenue to pursue, and it seemed appealing to me. So I had no problems foregrounding the fact that I was interested in making some money. And a lot of artists thought that was kind of not spiritually okay. But I, being a student of Andy Warhol, accepted that as normal. And I thought any possible way to get exposure and visibility was good. So when I sold a painting, or when I at the gallery, Semaphore Gallery on West Broadway, I had to fill the spot on the wall, because I would sell paintings all year long, not just at my shows. A lot of the sales were happening from the back room, while another artist was having his or her one-person show in the front room. Right. So they needed a new painting right away, and I would be carrying it wet. And it was also a practical matter, because you can't really wrap a wet painting in plastic, because you'd ruin it. So I would carry the wet painting down the street, and I was kind of a show-off. I wanted everyone to know that another Kostabi is sold. So I walked past the other galleries, especially the ones that rejected me at first, and I took pains to like twist the painting so that the painted part would face the gallery that I was walking by, or the restaurant that I was walking by, so they would see it. And every little bit of publicity or exposure I could get, I would take advantage of. Another was when it was time for me to hire assistants, which is an extremely normal thing that most successful artists in New York do to some degree, at least to prime the canvases. When I wanted to hire assistants, I needed to take out an ad in the Village Voice, the newspaper. And I saw an opportunity to put my name in the newspapers. If I was going to pay for this classified ad there, I should at least put my name in there and get to see my name in the paper, because I wanted to be famous. To be famous, you have to have your name in the paper. So I put my name in the ad. My ad read, "Help wanted, skilled academic realists to paint large wet-into-wet oil paintings based on drawings by Mark-Kostabi." My dealers were shocked that I would put my name in there because it was supposed to be a secret that other people painted your paintings. And that didn't seem logical to me, because I believed in honesty, one, and number two, name recognition and exposure. So that's why I put my name in the paper, and that led to a huge media blitz with articles, New York Magazine, People Magazine, and then on television on MTV, CNN, and Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and then I was also on the Oprah Winfrey Show. All based on me wanting one tiny little bit of visibility in a classified ad.
Yeah.
That's pretty good, Mark. We don't have time for one more question, but we're taking in from Greg anyway. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. I sometimes have a problem reconciling your point number 1 and your point number 6, the difference between making great art and getting other people to work for you. I always find that I make my paintings better than anybody else, and yet the whole point towards getting your work out seems to be geared towards production so much. What percentage of your paintings do you actually touch yourself, and how important is it to place production over the idea that this is your work, this is a Mark-Kostabi, or this is a Greg Larson? And
Greg, you're fading. Let Mark answer that. I'm going to mute you. Go ahead.
I like the question. It's a very appropriate question. First of all, when I elaborated on rule number 6, I didn't say that you necessarily have to have other people make your work for you. You have to get them to work for you in some way, in a promotional aspect, for example, with their enthusiasm, or to help you with the stuff that you don't have time for in your life, because you need your time to be painting in your studio or sculpting. You need time for that, plus you need time to circulate in the art world. So you shouldn't be doing mundane day-to-day things. You need time to devote to your career. Okay, that's one clarification. Plus, what you said is very valid about, it's completely okay to make your own paintings. That's ultimately what the public wants to believe an artist does. However, and Picasso did it that way. Picasso painted all his paintings himself, except for one theater backdrop that someone else executed. And obviously Van Gogh did. And but other equally great artists didn't do it that way. Like, not too many people are going to say that Picasso is 10 times better than Rembrandt, for example. I'd say they're equal. And Rembrandt is well known for having many employees execute a large part of his work. Same with Rubens and Raphael. And then there are some artists that are it's surprising, like Jean-Michel Basquiat, who you see his work looks like it has a highly personal, expressionistic touch that you couldn't possibly have someone else do for him. And yet even he had Rick Prohl, for example, work for him. Several of Basquiat's last works, like that Riding with Death, the background was painted by Rick Prohl, who worked for Basquiat for a while, and other aspects of his work was painted partially. But I'm not just saying they stretched the canvas. They actually did expressionist brushstrokes that are very important in the painting. So it's not black and white. There are lots of gray areas and colorful areas in this idea of painting everything by yourself. I personally believe that it's 100% impossible to do an artwork all by yourself. If you did that, you'd have to weave the canvas, grind the pigments, and you'd have to be the lamb that produced the wool to make the canvas or something. Art, like life, is a collaboration. There's no escaping. That said, it's also impossible to do what I've toyed with before, which is to say, I don't do any of my work, not even my ideas, and that's why I hire idea people to come up with my ideas. Now, that was the kind of provocative thing I said a lot in the 80s, which led into me being called a con artist, which I said I was at the beginning. And now there's a movie about me called Con Artist Out in the World. But I learned that it's impossible to completely obliterate your own personality from an artwork, too. Even if you have other people doing the ideas, other people executing them, other people coming up with the titles for them. Like, for example, my painting, Use Your Illusion, which Guns N' Roses used for their album cover, was titled by my brother, Paul-Kostabi. And I have a game show where celebrities compete to title my paintings for cash awards. So I have other people titling the works. I learned that even with all that quote-unquote detachment, it's impossible for me to not have my own personality in there. In the end, I do think that my personality is in my work a lot, maybe even more than when I quote-unquote did it all by myself, when I was an aspiring comic book artist, when my dream was to draw for Marvel. Thankfully, I didn't succeed at that because the fine art world was a lot more fun because there was more freedom, and here I am giving webinars on how to become a rich and famous artist.
Beautiful. What a good way to wrap this up. Greg, thanks very much. Mark, you're brilliant. You're insightful. You've shared a ton of information. This has been, and you know, you got a great smile, and this has been really, really wonderful. I really appreciate your participation. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Paul. Okay.
All right, let me unmute everybody else so that they can echo my sentiment. Mark, thank you.
Mark, talking with you.
You're very
Mark.
fabulous.
Owen.
All right, gang, I'm stopping the recording, and I'm going to mute everybody. Mark, thanks again. Talk to you soon.